The original Sonic the Hedgehog released 30 years ago on June 23rd, 1991 for the SEGA Mega Drive/Genesis, becoming the first major video game mascot to challenge Nintendo and Mario for top spot, whilst also making Sega's console a heavy competitor towards Nintendo's offerings. The game was a breath of fresh air back when it came out, being really the first platformer to be fully focused around speed. The speedy blue blur soon ran his way into many people's hearts, becoming one of the most popular video game characters of all time. But whilst the whole idea and concept of Sonic must have been quite simple to think of, the game, as well as Sonic himself, has a massive development story behind it. From originally being created for an internal mascot competition at Sega, Sonic went through many changes. He was originally even called Mr. Needlemouse, had a human girlfriend, and a whole band. A far cry from what Sonic 1 did eventually become. A rabbit and a familiar mustached man in pyjamas were even being considered over Sonic at one point, as well as the story of the game, which went through many changes before the game even released. Sonic 1 even helped Sega heavily gain market share from Nintendo thanks to the thinking of Tom Kalinske and the whole of Sega. Much more development information regarding Sonic 1 has been released as of making this video, specifically the build released by the Hidden Palace in the cutting room floor, containing a lot of secrets about Sonic 1's development which we didn't know before. As well as the 30th anniversary of Sonic just being around the corner, I thought it would make a good video talking about the development behind this game, as well as Sonic as a whole. So for episode 4 of our concept to release, we're going to cover the origins and development of the original Sonic the Hedgehog. The origins of Sonic as a character can be traced back to the mid-80s. The video game industry had just recovered from the crash of '83, with Nintendo having massive success with their NES console.
Now you're playing with power.
As well as one famous plumber, Mario, taking the world by storm. Sega at this time, around 1985 to be precise, had just released their first mainstream console, the Sega Master System. Although the Master System was a good console, it struggled to compete with the console king at the time, Nintendo, and was hardly giving them any competition. The company though didn't want to just continue being successful in the arcade industry, and decided to keep pushing in the console industry, releasing a new 16-bit system in Japan during October 1988, known as the Sega Mega Drive, with the system releasing the following February in the US, known as the SEGA Genesis, then worldwide in 1990. This new system was Sega's first major effort to knock the kings of the console industry, Nintendo, off their throne, and the console certainly had the tools to do that. With it being one of the first 16-bit systems, it allowed for much better graphics, sound, and pretty much everything, and it certainly had the lead hardware-wise compared to what its competitors had at the time, as well as the system picking up some much-needed exclusives back in its early life. But something was missing to take the system to the next level, and be able to compete heavily with its competition. And that one thing was a company mascot. Pretty much all major video game companies were pushing mascots for their brands back in the late 80s and early 90s. Nintendo of course had Mario, Namco had Pac-Man, Capcom had Mega Man, and so on and so forth. Sega's mascot throughout the Master System and early Mega Drive era though was Alex Kidd. Alex though, as much as the character's games were good, he didn't really have the momentum Sega wanted for a mascot in order to push their new system and the company as a whole. A mascot was pretty much like a missing key to Sega at the time, the one thing they needed to maximise success for their console. Shortly after the Mega Drive launched, presumably around 1989, Sega began by having an internal competition across all their divisions to create the company's new mascot to compete with Nintendo's Mario. For months, numerous characters were submitted, from an American wolf to a chicken with attitude. One man submitted multiple characters into the contest, from a rabbit, a familiar mustached man in pyjamas, one hedgehog with an attitude, along with 2 other characters as well. This man was none other than Naoto Hojima, who previously worked on Sega's Phantasy Star series. His rabbit character was initially the favourite, who would pick up items with his ears and throw them at enemies. This character in future years would eventually go on to become Sega's Rystar, but that's a story for another time. Higher-ups at Sega at the time initially went with Naoto's rabbit character, with them wanting to produce a new game for the character. Oshima of course was pleased to hear that Sega had chosen his character, and after some discussion, he approached Yuji Naka to collaborate with him on the project. Naka previously worked on Phantasy Star with him. Having recently just come off a cancelled robot game, Naka was eager to get started on a new project, and as soon as they started working together, Naka began suggesting the idea that the game should have some fast game design compared to Mario's slower gameplay style. Even as a child, Naka had always been into fast cars and speed. He wanted to incorporate this into a platformer, which at the time had not been implemented into a successful platformer. But as soon as early development began on the engine though, they realised that the game wasn't really consistent enough with speed, with the player having to pick up items consistently breaking the flow. This would be an issue, especially if they wanted to keep the controls simple. To the team's benefit though, another employee at Sega known as Hirokazu Yashura joined the team to help tackle this. He knew straight away that the problem they were having was to do with the attack mechanic, as it didn't really give off the illusion of speed, and the current rabbit character didn't help either. To combat this, they soon came up with the idea of the character having to jump up into a ball and attack enemies. From this point forward, the team decided to abandon the rabbit character, and although the familiar mustached man was still a favourite, the team decided to turn to one of Oshima's previous character designs known as Mr. Hedgehog. They knew a hedgehog character would be a perfect fit for the game, as hedgehogs naturally curl up into a ball to defend themselves, although of course the character still needed some tweaking. Mr. Hedgehog would soon turn into a character styled off Mickey Mouse and Felix the Cat, soon morphing into the most famous hedgehog in the world, a blue hedgehog with red shoes inspired from the look of Santa, with his shoes having a famous buckle inspired from Michael Jackson, and of course his famous attitude was inspired from the rising star in politics, Bill Clinton weirdly enough, and with a name change, Sonic the Hedgehog was born. Surprisingly though, higher-ups at Sega still thought that they were working on the rabbit game, and had no idea about the speedy blue hedgehog that they were working on. Although presenting the game to Sega, Oshima decided to present the character along with his other characters to members of the public, and of course, Sonic was the public's preferred character. The team also contacted Sega's marketing team to make a plush of the character, which would be used in the pitch. And by showcasing the character's market strength, coupled with the strength of the game, the team known as AM8 at the time, was given the green light to create Sonic the Hedgehog. Now that we've looked at the development of Sonic as a character, the game's actual development began around April 1990, with the game's design and physics being worked on at first. At the start of development, Sonic was actually meant to be in a rock band, have a human girlfriend called Madonna, fight off monsters, along with a certain egg-shaped Bumblebee man. Although none of these would make it into the final game, and was scrapped sometime early on in development, presumably after the Tokyo Toy Show build, for a number of reasons, which I'll explain later in the video. Some did pop up later on in the series, like Vector the Crocodile, reappearing in Knuckles Chaotix, and a bunch of other Sonic titles in the future. Instead of focusing on the planned characters, the team decided to focus on developing South Island, where the game was set, but Oshima knew that they still needed a villain for the game. He decided to look back at the earlier sketches he did of possible characters, turning back specifically to the mustached man. He began simplifying the design of them onto pajama and bumblebee styled clothes, replacing them with black, red and yellow clothes, and by topping it all off with an evil personality, Dr. Eggman was born. This point of development was also where the first ever public build of the game was shown, at the 1990 Tokyo Toy Show. This build of the game Morwell tech demo showed off a very early Green Hill Zone, along with an early title screen. Sonic himself, throughout the screenshots we have of this build, looked fairly different from his final design, as well as an unused enemy being shown throughout some of the screenshots too. The RAW of this build though is unfortunately lost like many of Sonic 1's beta builds. This build specifically though is one of the most sought after development builds of the game, just because of how much it differs from the final game. This build was also originally planned to be in Sonic Mega Collection at some point, although it was never included due to Sega losing the ROM. Hopefully someday this build is eventually found, and we can truly find out some of the more secrets behind the development of this game. The next part of Sonic 1's development Sega needed to complete was the game's soundtrack. The team decided to hire Masato Nakamura, an already established musician part of the Dreams Come True band, to compose the game's soundtrack. Nakamura was given some of Oshima's level concept art for inspiration, with him initially wanting to compose his music for the game as if it was a film, wanting the notes to make the game stand out towards the player. In the game we can certainly see this in zones such as Green Hill, Starlight and Scrap Brain Zone. Sega even sponsored Dreams Come True during Nakamura's involvement with the game. Sonic himself even appeared on posters for the band in late 1990. The story of the game presumably around this time was also close to the final version, where Sonic goes after Eggman across all parts of South Island for transforming his animal friends into robots, whilst also collecting the Chaos Emeralds along the way. With everything now planned and laid out, development went into full swing over the next 11 months, with the engine and levels being heavily worked on, specifically with Sonic's momentum physics. The famous loop-to-loops were one major frustration for the team during development. Naka wanted the game's momentum to be as fast as it could go, without limiting the Mega Drive's power of course. Though this would quickly get out of hand, with the game getting so fast at one point, Naka even got motion sickness from it. They eventually decided to limit Sonic's speed, and make the game slow enough so anyone could pick up and play without being overwhelmed. The balance also allowed Sonic's animation and physics to be more natural. Aside from making the game as best as it could be, Hirokazu Yashihara wanted Sonic to appeal in multiple markets than just one. He designed each level with different market interests in mind, some with more speed, some with more platforming, and some with more challenging aspects. Most zones throughout development though went through many changes. Green Hill used to have a rolling ball towards the start of Act 1, Marble Zone used to have UFOs and falling tiles, Spring Yard Zone was originally called Sparkling Zone, Labyrinth Zone had an unused background, and Scrap Brain was originally called Clockwork Zone. The special stage also went through a few background changes, though from what we know, the special stage as well as the Chaos Emerald stayed relatively the same throughout development, even before the band and Madonna was scrapped. Sonic 1 is also quite famous for having a lot of unused sprites and items seen in many prototypes of the game. Some unused Sonic sprites include some of him holding his breath, and one of him gulping for air, which obviously would have come from the underwater parts of the game. There's also a sprite of Sonic jumping up in the air, which can actually be seen in the recent done prototype of the game, which shows where Sonic reaches the end of a level. This sprite also reappeared in Sonic Mania at the same point when Sonic reaches the end of a level. A few more unused Sonic sprites include one of him sliding, a few unused dash sprites, a couple of Sonic shrinking, and a black and white Sonic sprite, which I assume is from when Sonic dies when touching lava. The game also has a few unused items, including an Eggman one, which in other Sonic games harms the player. A goggles power-up was originally going to be in the game, as well as a static monitor and an S power-up, which also reappears in the prototype of Sonic CD, as well as having the ability to turn Sonic into Super Sonic in the Christian Whitehead remix. A badnik known as Splats the Bunny was originally going to be in Sonic 1, but would instead reappear in Sonic Mania. Another piece of cut content from the game was that Eggman was originally supposed to have legs built onto his vehicle. Maybe this was the major inspiration for the first boss in Sonic CD. Whilst there is a ton more cut content in Sonic 1, I decided to only mention the most notable ones. If you want a more in-depth look into all the cut content from Sonic 1, I definitely recommend checking out the Cutting Room Flaws article on Sonic 1. There's a link in the description if you're interested. Moving back to the development history, the music of the game throughout the dump builds we have available wasn't changed too much, apart from having a few different notes of course. The famous Sonic 1 title screen, inspired from Oshima's other title screens he made for other SEGA games, remained mainly unchanged throughout development, with it originally having the words "press to start" underneath it. Although it is present in the final version, it never shows due to a glitch with the Sonic Team text. The SEGA logo upon launching the game also changed throughout development, from the standard SEGA logo seen in most Mega Drive games to the famous SEGA screen we all know today. Whilst there aren't too many dump prototypes of Sonic 1, aside from the recent one by the Hidden Palace, there are a few known prototypes of the game, although there isn't much information surrounding them. Hopefully someday the ROMs are dumped and we can see more into Sonic 1's development history. As the 8-member AM8 team neared the end of development, they decided to rename AM8 to the now iconic Sonic Team, with the studio going on to develop many Sonic games in the future, with of course some being better than others. At this point of course the game was nearing the end of development, but there was still a lot of work to be done across shores to make Sonic more appealing towards people in the US. Higher-ups at SEGA of America, originally back at the beginning of Sonic's concept stage, weren't too keen on a Japanese design of Sonic. Especially Michael Katz, the then CEO of SEGA of America, reacted quite negatively towards Sonic's concept, writing a letter back to SEGA of Japan listing multiple reasons why Sonic wouldn't succeed in America. This of course sent the marketing team into quite a panic, and they soon started looking for a designer to create a version of Sonic for an American audience. Though at SEGA of America, things changed quite quickly as Tom Kalinske became the new CEO of the company. As soon as Tom became CEO, like Michael, he was not keen on the concept of Sonic, especially the rock band and Madonna. He was originally put off by the Blue Hedgehog, when instead of rejecting Sonic, he decided to request that Sonic's universe would be remade for the West. He soon appointed Madeline Schroeder as the Sonic brand leader, who people at SEGA of America referred to as the mother of Sonic. Madeline and her team then tasked Greg Martin, an artist who previously did work for Hanna-Barbera, to create the American design of Sonic, modifying the character to appeal to a Western audience, whilst keeping his attitude the same. First, the early concept fangs of Sonic were removed. Sonic's shape was also made softer, looking similar to 80s cartoon characters of the time, whilst also modifying other parts of Sonic too. Eggman also received an overall too, making him appear more sinister, whilst also being renamed to Dr. Robotnik, as well as renames for some of the badniks. They also remade most of the fiction Sonic Team came up for Sonic, with Al Nilsson, SEGA of America's then Director of Marketing, remaking the story, with it going along like this. Sonic was born Sonny, a small brown hedgehog whose incredible speed made him somewhat famous in the Nebraskan town he lived. One day when he should have been preparing to hibernate, Sonny instead decided to continue training in the hopes of one day being good enough for the Olympics. But his then natural instincts took over, causing the hedgehog to fall asleep right above the laboratory of a crazy scientist. Soon after this encounter, Sonny would become Sonic the Hedgehog, with his middle name just becoming The. Jumping back to Eggman though, there are multiple names being considered for his American counterpart, being Dr. X, Dr. Gloom, Dr. Watt, Mr. Badwrench, Mr. Badyear, Fatty Robotnik, and Ivo, with some of these names being mashed together, becoming his chosen name, Dr. Ivo Robotnik. These proposed changes for Sonic in the US though weren't as major as some other Japanese developers adapting their games for the US market. Sonic Team initially was quite unhappy when they saw what SEGA of America wanted to do to their game. Oshima in later years even went on to say that he was confused to why SEGA of America wanted to redesign his work, with him already having a US audience in mind when designing Sonic. Madeline, after hearing about Sonic Team's concern, decided to fly out to Japan to have a meeting with the team about why the changes were being done. Sonic Team initially said during the meeting that the changes would cause 2 major characters to be created. Meanwhile, SEGA of America countered this by saying that to make Sonic a global icon, there had to be a degree of unity. Though when Madeline returned to the US, it took both divisions a bit of time to realise why these changes were needed. Yuji Naka in later years would reflect on the situation in 1990 by saying this: "In those days, I hated the American change to the look and feel, and I didn't know why the consumers would perceive it, but looking back, that's one of the reasons that it succeeded." Though when Sonic did eventually release, the game shipped in different packaging across the globe. Jumping back to early 1991 when Sonic 1's development was pretty much wrapping up, Tom Kalinske was trying to create a new strategy which could help the Genesis succeed in America. Executives at SEGA were also starting to realise how much potential the game had, especially Tom Kalinske. He wanted Sonic to be part of his 4-point strategy to help Sonic succeed in America as well as the Genesis, like I mentioned before. His plan was to make Sonic the new packing game with the Genesis instead of Altered Beast, to help propel Sonic's popularity in the US while selling the system. He also wanted to directly attack Nintendo by extending their already existing famous Sega Does What Nintendo campaign with the help of Al Nilsson.
What Nintendo?
They also planned to continue building a strong presence in sport games, as well as lowering the price of the system and instead focus on making core exclusives to make up for the cut price. At first, Nakayama was confused to how packaging Sonic with the system in the US would help it succeed, as Sega was already losing money for each console they sold, and then making it back by each game they sold. Nakayama, after hearing Kalinske's plan in the meeting, kicked his chair to the ground and stormed out of the room. But before he left, he turned back to Kalinske and said, "If this is the only way to beat Nintendo, do it." Now, because Sega already had a large backstock of Altered Beast systems, they decided to give people who bought these systems a free copy of Sonic as well, from July 1st to September 1991, as well as released the new Sonic systems alongside them. Sega of America also knew before they could sell these systems, they needed to get a new advertising campaign ready for launch. Sega of America also requested that Sega of Japan show off the game a few weeks before release, to keep the game fresh in the mind of consumers. Sonic also started to appear in video game magazines after this across the globe. Although Sonic was briefly demoed at the Winter CES in January 1991, they decided to show off the game fully at the Summer CES that year. With the Super Nintendo being a few months away at this point, Sega wanted to fully show off the game compared to Super Mario World. With the help of the aggressive Sega Does What Nintendo campaign, Sega managed to show off Sonic's speed to consumers compared to the slower pace of Nintendo's upcoming Mario title, ultimately helping the Genesis' success in the US, as well as Sonic the Hedgehog, but we'll get to that later. Bear in mind, all the business with not showing the game off too much before release was all part of Kalinske's plan to build mystery around the game, as well as keeping it in consumers' minds before release. Despite the game having a few minor appearances in magazines and other media like I mentioned before, as well as appearing in the pilot of Nick Arcade. Sega also ran the Sega World Tour in September 1991, going to multiple shopping malls across the US to show off Sonic, similar to what they did previously at the Summer CES. Sega of America, like Sega of Japan, made a 3-part manga about Sonic's origin stories, made a promotional comic for the US featuring the Sonic origin story, which Madeline Schroeder helped create to promote Sonic even more across the US. The UK Sonic the Comic ran a similar story to this a few years later. On June 23rd, 1991, Sonic the Hedgehog released first in the US, packaged with new Genesis consoles and on store shelves. The European 50Hz version of the game released later in July, and it released in Japan on July 23rd, with the Japanese version of the game having a few bug fixes, with the notable spike bug not being present in this version. Sonic across the globe soon became an extremely popular title for Sega, in fact the most important title ever. Especially in the US, thanks to it being packaged with new Sega Genesis consoles, it helped boost the console sales in the US, as well as the whole globe, as the game was soon included in Mega Drives across Europe and Japan as well. Sonic soon established himself as a true competitor to Mario, and helped Sega start to heavily challenge Nintendo for top spot, thanks to one speedy hedgehog. The early success of Sonic could have seen it be ported onto multiple platforms, including ports for the Sega CD and PC like the Amiga, though none of these ports would eventually happen, and the Sega CD would eventually get its own Sonic game. The game, of course, in future was ported to many platforms like the Sega Saturn, mobile, and many future consoles to come. Sega, a few months after launch, released a unique 8-bit version of Sonic 1 for the Sega Game Gear, which does in fact have a ton of major differences compared to the 16-bit version. I definitely think it deserved its own video at some point, which is why I haven't really talked about it too much in this one. Sonic in future would become a massive brand, as well as a major mascot for Sega, spawning many sequels and spin-offs, comics, TV shows, themed arcades, as well as a massive fanbase behind the Speedy Blue Blur, as well as a recent ongoing movie series, introducing the series to younger generations. The game would eventually become the best-selling Sega Mega Drive / Genesis game of all time, selling over 30 million copies. The story of this game just goes to show how one small team, creativity, and a massive bold strategy could help give your game a massive boost to success, and how a few small changes could help make your character appealing to multiple audiences, as well as boosting your console and company to top spot. Sonic would eventually become one of the most popular and iconic video game characters of all time. With the Blue Blur's 30th anniversary happening this year as of releasing this video, the future looks bright for Sonic, and I hope he continues to foil Eggman's doomsday plans for years to come.